2, 3, 4.
We want ethics on the court.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Those were protesters out in front of Clarence Thomas, Justice Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh, the same Brett Kavanaugh who almost got assassinated by these nutballs earlier. Joining me now, Bill Jacobson, Cornell professor, Cornell University law professor, and founder of the Great Legal Insurrection. Okay, Bill, I'm almost positive it's illegal to do that out in front of a Supreme Court justice's house. I read that somewhere, but you're the lawyer. You tell me.
Well, there is a federal statute which prohibits protesting at a judge's home, not limited to Supreme Court justices, at a judge's home for the purpose of influencing the judge or obstructing justice. So the question would be, legally, are they trying to influence? Well, certainly the protests that took place between the leak of the Dobbs decision and the actual Supreme Court issuing its decision clearly were intended to influence the justices. And I think you could probably say these so-called ethics protests also are. They're trying to influence them to go along with Dick Durbin and the other Democrats who want to impose some sort of external ethics code on the Supreme Court justices. So I think clearly it violates the statute. Now, some people say the statute's unconstitutional and has never been challenged, but it's on the books. And as we know, the FBI and the DOJ love to enforce even petty laws that are on the books when it's politically convenient for them.
Okay, well, what kind of a country do we have then? I don't mean to step away and get too broad with this whole thing, but what kind of country do we have then when, if Democrats are in charge, they can just decide not to enforce laws if Republicans are being harassed? That's, okay, so you don't have a constitution anymore. Well, I don't know what this is, but you don't have a country.
Well, that is a problem. I mean, it's unheard of. I've never heard of until after, when the Dobbs decision leaked, protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. I mean, that was unthinkable. And the White House was reticent to criticize it. Call it illegal. It was a nod and a wink to these protesters and, Democrat politicians as well. So I think it's very, very frightening because what it says is it's essentially mob rule. Whoever controls the streets is going to control everything. And that's obviously not the way it needs to be. So it's an extremely troublesome development that DOJ, which can be extremely aggressive, including prosecuting people for parading on January 6th, will not enforce a statute that is on the books, is the law of the land right now, which says they can't be doing what they're doing. And so I think that's extremely troubling, but it's typical of what's happened with Merrick Garland and with the Biden Department of Justice. Everything seems to be political these days.
Everything's political. All right, well, let's move on then to this. It's very obvious there's been a ramp up in attacks on Supreme Court justices, not just the attempted assassination of Kavanaugh, the smearing of Clarence Thomas, which I know is nothing new, but that's obviously ramped up. It's obvious to me, at least, that they're coming for the court in some way, that they can't stand that there's any kind of a bulwark. Do I have that right?
Yes. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court is really the one institution that has not been completely captured by the left. Congress goes back and forth, but certainly the Supreme Court conservative majority is going to be there for a long time. And it is driving them absolutely crazy that they can't control absolutely everything. And so I think it's a three-part game that they're playing. One is simply to diminish the influence of the court and diminish the respect of the court. And therefore, you have calls for people from the progressive movement, but others also, to disregard Supreme Court decisions, disregard court decisions. So it's to limit the influence of the court. The second one, I think, is to justify some sort of court packing or change in the nature of the court. But to do that, they're going to have to get a lot more votes than they currently have. So that's probably not going to work out for them. And it polls very poorly, court packing. The third one, which I think is what they're really up to here, is to try to pressure one or two of the justices to resign by making their lives so miserable. So they're protesting outside their homes. There's been an assassination attempt on one of them. They are going after family members now. And so what I think you're seeing is a lashing out, trying to pressure one of the justices to resign, or worse, and they wouldn't say it, but I think that's lurking behind, that maybe next time one of these protests will be effective and will, either injure or kill a Supreme Court justice. And I think that's part of what the game plan here is. Of course, they'd never say that, and that probably isn't the game plan of Dick Durbin. But these crazy activists who are out in front of the House, I think, are up to no good, and I think there should be a lot more protection for these justices than they're getting.
Why is it a big deal that the Dobbs decision leaked and that they've never found the guy?
The guy or the gal, we don't know who it is.
Yeah.
Because that is part of this effort to undermine the court. This undermining of the court is not a new thing. It didn't start with the leak of the Dobbs. The Dobbs leak was, in effect, the symptom of the bigger problem, which is a lack of respect for the court, as long as it's controlled by a conservative majority. So it undermines the court's ability to deliberate, to express views to each other. Initial decisions are not always the final decision. And if justices can't feel free to share their thoughts with other justices, that in and of itself obstructs the normal administration of justice. It also it sets a precedent. It sets a negative precedent that you can do this and get away with it. So what's the next thing that somebody's going to do that they're going to get away with? So once you break a norm, once you say that the things that have always guided us, even if they're not written in law and they're not written in stone, but they've always guided us as normative, normal behavior, no longer apply, then there's a whole slew of things that can happen.
The judges in the really all the January 6 cases in D.C. have done some things that I've found to be absolutely stunning. You've got people out there reading basically what amount to struggle session apologies. It's been unreal watching the court system in Washington, D.C. Has this bothered you at all?
Yeah, I mean, my position, which I've written many times and said many times, is that January 6th riot shouldn't have happened, okay? And there was a part of it that was violent, and the people who, pepper sprayed police in the face or hit them over the head with things should be prosecuted. I don't think that's controversial. But what you're getting is a years-long manhunt for anybody who had any connection. There was recently an elderly woman who brought her even older mother, was in the Capitol for maybe 5 minutes, I think, walked through an open door, being prosecuted. You're getting prosecuted people who committed no violence, committed no wrong that would normally be prosecuted. Normally, parading is not prosecuted. That's not a thing that happens. But for political reasons, anything connected to January 6th, and I think it's very damaging to the country. Again, I don't think many people, certainly I don't object to somebody who hit a policeman over the head or pepper sprayed a policeman or did anything like that being prosecuted as they would be if the crime took place on the street or in the Capitol or anywhere else. But I think it's extremely damaging what the Department of Justice is doing now, which is seeking anybody who had any connection whatsoever, even if they themselves did nothing wrong.
You like what you just saw? Subscribe to the YouTube channel. The First TV has a YouTube channel. It's outstanding. Go hit that subscribe button now.